Hello, class. Welcome once again to Beetle University. I am Professor Moftop. As always, a billion thank yous to each and every one of you. Again and again and again and again. This week, we're jumping back into our White Album wrap-up. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about the White Album, but one of the things that I didn't talk about throughout the session when discussing the individual songs is the last session for the White Album. It's one of the cooler days in Beatle history. It was Wednesday, October 16th, 1968. They had already missed the deadline for when they were supposed to have the record to the record pressing factories to be able to get the album released in time. But because they were the Beatles, everyone would wait for them. But it was time to get it together now. George Harrison had already flown out of the country. He was going to produce the Jackie Lomax album that would be released on the Apple Records label. Also, while he was in the United States at the time, he was on the Smothers Brothers show. You get to hear a little audio of that. Ringo was quick to vacation. He was tired from the sessions. There was a lot of stress. It wasn't as enjoyable for him as it had been in the past. He had borrowed a boat from Peter Sellers, if you may recall, when he briefly left the band. He had borrowed this yacht. I say boat, it is a yacht. He borrowed it again. And this is when he wrote Octopus's Garden, or maybe he wrote it when he left the band earlier, or maybe it was sometime in between, and that was Honey Pie, as you probably have figured out. John, Paul, and George Martin, the three of them really decided how the final running order of the album was going to go. In the past, they had always really worked really hard on making sure that the album was well-paced, that the first song on each side of the album would be especially energetic, and the last song on the album would be one that would be hard to, on the album side, would be one that would be hard to follow. This was pretty challenging for the White Album because there were so many different diverse songs, so many different tempos, so many different styles of songs, and of course there was Revolution 9, which was impossible to categorize. Now, there was a big debate amongst them. Apparently there was a heated discussion between John and Paul about whether or not Revolution 9 should be released at all. It was also brought up, likely by George Martin, that it should maybe just be a single album, and the double album thing would be nice, but is it absolutely necessary? John and Paul immediately said no to that because they wanted the double album. Bob Dylan had a double album, Frank Zappa had a double album, they were going to have a double album. They also decided that each song would segue into the next song with something unusual, either a crossfade or some strange noise or a count-in or a little bit of unusual dialogue, something, or no space at all in between songs, which makes for an extremely unusual listening experience as the double White Album goes. They decided that side 2 was going to be all the Animal songs, and side 3 would be more of the rock and roll songs. Now, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey is on side 3, where I think it should be on side 2 as the Animal songs go, but they didn't ask me at the time. And then side 4 is where they put kind of all the really weird and unusual stuff, as they did with Revolution 9. Side 1 then is where they gave what they thought was really the best of the album, that it was a really good, solid side 1 of 4. After a 24-hour mixing session, they finally finished the White Album, the double album, and they released it, and it came out in November of 68. So when you're talking Beatles and there's big money involved, when they need to press a double album, they really worked very hard to get it done. This was something that had happened in 1965 as well with Rubber Soul. You're going to get 2 hunks of audio this week. One's all about that 24-hour session. The other is about some of the extra stuff that I had learned from the time that I started doing the White Album to the time that it was done. The word zap, as mentioned in the continuing story of Bungalow Bill, where Captain Marvel zapped him right between the eyes, comes from a guy named Buddy Dresner, who the Beatles crossed paths with in February of 1964. Now, he was a high-level security guard, and in the past, he had done security for Elvis Presley, for Frank Sinatra, and he was the guy who was in charge of security when John F. Kennedy came to town, when he came to Miami. This is where the Beatles met him, was in Miami. Shortly after JFK was in Miami, of course, he went to Dallas, which is where he was assassinated. So it was very interesting that the Beatles were able to cross paths with this guy, who they got to be buddies with. He took them fishing, he brought them swimming to a friend's house, and As they were watching TV together, they were watching a space-age scientific show, and he said, boy, I could really get those criminals if I had a gun like that. I could really zap them. And John remembered the term zap. So when Captain Marvel zaps him right between the eyes, that's where zap comes from. I also learned that in Helter Skelter, when they were recording, they were real wild. And at one point, George Harrison started some ashtray on fire and ran around the studio. As well as while they were doing this, they brought in strobe lights, but after a while, they got dizzy and sick and had to turn them off. You'll hear Professor Moptop talking about the cover, which was designed by Richard Hamilton. You'll hear about the debate of whether or not it should have been a single LP or a double LP, and we discuss how the very last thing that we hear on the double white album is Ringo saying goodnight, everybody, everywhere, to everybody in the entire universe. And with that, it's time for me to say so long. I will talk to you again. Thanks so much. I'm Professor Moptop.